Hey Dad, I'm live streaming. Say hi to YouTube. Hey Dad, say hi to YouTube. Hey Dad, say hi to YouTube, cause I'm live streaming. They can hear you, bitch. Like a bitch.
That bird's chasing ghosts. He has some pieces of the puzzle, but doesn't know he's a piece himself. You have no idea what's coming. I won't show him mercy. He showed me. What the hell? Kill the rest. Adler, he's alive.
Oh, season 1 Cold War, Warzone. Cool. Alright, well, we're about to get creeped out with the Beyond Creepy. He makes some good videos. Gifts and gargoyles. Damn, never. When I was an Isle tiger, sleep loving me.
Halloween is a special for Maureen Smith. A Halloween night in the 1970s would be one she would never forget, for it was the night she discovered that monsters really do exist. Maureen, then 12, was excited about the prospect of going trick-or-treating with her brother and two cousins.
Observer.
Her parents' house in England was about 2 doors down from the bottom of the street, at which stood a small field with shed-style garages sitting at the top end.
Uh-oh.
The streets in her neighborhood were fairly narrow.
Marrow.
You couldn't double park the car, she remembered,
Tomato.
as Maureen waited for her father to put a string through her lantern. Her impatient brother and cousins started off down the street, beginning their night of fun. I could hear them going into the street, leaving me behind. Dad got the string sorted and lit my candle, and I was away, out to join my siblings. I walked to the bottom of the street to see my family, but I could hear the muffled voices and voices of other kids from our streets. Maureen claimed she went out to the field, which was partially obscured by the garages, and observed a kind of shimmer around the edge, like a fog. The air felt heavy and thick, she recalled. She could still hear the muffled voices, but no one was in sight. She kept walking, looking about. Where had they all gone? Now standing between two garages, Maureen suddenly felt as though she was being watched. She turned to her left and saw something straight out of a horror movie. Only this was real. This was not some kid in a costume. This thing was real, and it was standing next to her. The best word she could find to describe it was gargoyle. Its eyes were sort of pearl-colored. It was probably a foot taller than me. We looked at each other, and that's it. That's all I can remember. Maureen's next conscious memory was waking up in her parents' kitchen in her armchair. Her lantern, which was still lit, was sitting on the table. There's another account from Alton, Illinois, involving a young girl and a gargoyle-like creature. Some of my longtime listeners might remember it. Mary Ledbetter claims that in the late 1960s, when she was around 6 years old, She was with a group of children playing in the woods when she had her encounter. Mary claims that she and some friends were running to their clubhouse when Mary fell behind. She was suddenly stopped in her tracks by something that grabbed her by the back of her head. She swung around and was confronted by a creature she described as a cross between a gargoyle, a bat, and a devil. It paralyzed her where she stood. None of her friends, who were well ahead of her on the trail, stopped to check on her. They just carried on. Mary claims the creature was inside her mind, reading her thoughts. She got the sense that it was looking for information pertaining to technology. After it was done with her, it released her. She ran off to be with her friends. I've never remembered anything about that day until I was well into my 40s. My hopes are one day to be hypnotized to see if I have any memories of this gargoyle thing's technology. Because as he was reading my brain, I could see his too. So that being said, there's no telling what memory of its technology I have. Both of these cases involve very young girls. They were with a group of friends, other children, and at the moment they fell behind and were left alone, this apparent gargoyle-like entity pounced. In the first case, the girl was left with missing time. In the second case, Mary's full memory of the incident did not return until 40 years later. The witness in the second case claims that it opened a type of two-way telepathic communication that allowed her to see into its mind as he looked into hers, as if the creature was unable to have that link go only one way. Surely it would not want her seeing what it knew. Granted, it did seem able to wipe her memory, so maybe it just didn't care.
Just over 9 minutes to go in this quarter. They need to score on this drive.
It's tamale season, bro.
Tamales are back at Del Taco, filled with shredded pork and wrapped in a traditional corn husk. They're delicious as they are, or smother them with chili and cheese, red and green sauce, or spicy Cholula sauce. Starting at 2 for $4 now at Del Taco. Eat one today. Save some for tamale.
Care. In 1934, young Juan Rivera Feliberti was flying a kite in a field outside of the town of Mayagüez in Puerto Rico when he suddenly felt something pulling on his kite. Looking up, he was surprised to see a silvery sphere about 20 feet in diameter, hovering almost directly over top of him. As he stared up at it, a beam of light exploded out of the object and moved directly at the witness, who began to float upwards into the craft. He was lowered into the sphere via an opening at the top. Inside, he saw a man wearing a dark green tight-fitting outfit sitting at a control panel, which had a shiny crystal resembling an emerald. Next to him stood a blonde girl with rosy skin and wearing a silvery outfit. She looked very young. She was holding Juan's kite in her hands. He was then taken into another room by the girl and shown a box that emitted certain images. The girl then showed Juan a little box full of colored buttons and asked him if he wanted to play with it. She then pressed some of the buttons on the box, and suddenly a cloud of spiraling smoke came out of it. The smoke took the form of a, quote, monkey-like creature. Soon more of these strange creatures took shape in the haze. Next, the girl asked Juan if he wanted to trade his kite for the box, and he, without hesitation, agreed. Eventually, Juan was deposited back onto the field. He landed on the ground with enough force that it twisted his ankle. The object zipped away. Juan returned home with this strange box. He kept it for several weeks. He managed to figure out the combination of buttons pushed, allowing for the monkeys to appear. At times he would entertain his friends by showing them these strange monkey creatures. The friends just assumed that it was some kind of a magic trick. Curiously, while his friends could clearly see the creatures, the grown-ups couldn't. It was these monkey creatures that ultimately led Juan to get rid of the box. He noted that they were uncontrollable, and after some time, they had all escaped from his room. One day, Juan decided that he'd had enough. He walked out to a nearby mountain with a shovel and buried it. Juan admits that the monkeys that had escaped from his room were probably still roaming around the forests of Puerto Rico even today. In an interesting coincidence, sometime in the late 1940s or early 1950s, monkeys were suddenly being sighted in the forests of Puerto Rico, even though they were not native to the area. The explanation given for the sudden appearance of the monkeys was that some had escaped from research laboratories. Granted, Juan's monkeys were only visible to a certain age group, apparently. I have not been able to track down any Puerto Rican phantom monkey encounters circa the 1930s, so who knows. Juan would go on to have other encounters with the visitors, though none were as bizarre as his experience in 1934. Personally, I found this account fascinating, as it is one of the few cases I've read about in which the beings allowed the abductee to actually keep an item that might prove their existence. Recently, Albert Rosales sent me other cases involving strange boxes which were gifted to people by the visitors. The outcomes of these cases are as bizarre as you might expect, including one in which a woman was able to raise her deceased father from the dead.
No way.
Status?
Still working. Getting close. Maybe. You gotta keep those drones off that transmitter. It won't hold out forever.
Helicopter inbound. Heading way up.
Tank squad is going. On our way.
God damn it.
Rico!
No. Transmitter.
Transmitter fucked up and you did.
The world's thinnest tablet is a paper tablet. Introducing remarkable tool. Now twice as responsive. 30% thinner. Smarter. And with 2 weeks of battery life. Convert your handwriting into text. Import documents and write directly on them.
I couldn't
Status.
Still working. Getting close. Maybe.
1950, Jacksonville, Florida. At around 9 p.m., two people, a man and a woman,
Remember,
were walking
from
home, taking a shortcut to the neighborhood park. And the female looked up and noticed something unusual in the night sky. Even though it was dark and no stars could be seen in the night sky, directly above where they were walking, it was just a black circle, no stars.
Keep those drones off that transmitter.
All around the edges of the black circle, stars were visible, but inside the circle, it was just dark. It was as if something black and circular was directly over it. The witness pointed this anomaly out to her male companion, who just shrugged it off. In front of their apartment was a park bench. The female then asked if they could sit on the bench for a while before heading inside. She wanted to make out what she was seeing. Just as they were about to sit, the female then noticed and pointed out something to her companion. There, about a half a block away, sat a silver-gray, disc-like object. According to the witness, the object just seemed to appear. 1 second it wasn't there, and the next it was. They were able to make out that it looked smaller than a school bus. It had a broad, shallow dome on top, with no discernible windows or lights. They stared at it for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it.
You do not know the way.
Was it a new type of plane, they wondered?
Hello, my friend.
Just then, something moved on the left side of the object. A type of awning slowly began lifting from its left side. This frightened them, and they began backing away in the direction of their apartment, keeping their eye on the object as they walked. This is when they noticed three figures, dressed in what looked like jumpsuits, moving towards them. They rushed inside their apartment, but these figures were on them within seconds. Two stood by the doorway of the apartment, while a third moved into the living room area where they were standing. The whole thing happened very quickly, but the witness recalled that the being walked right past where she was standing and up to where her male companion was. He stared at her companion face to face. This being was short, bald, with a flat-faced profile. She thought he was wearing some type of dark glasses, but she did not notice any stems on the lenses. She realized later that these black things she mistook for glasses might have, in fact, been the creature's eyes. As she stared at this being, she heard a voice in her head saying, "We did not come for you this time. You were able to see us because of the attachments." The voice then added, "You will not remember this." It repeated this over and over. "You will not remember this." That was her and her companion's last conscious memory of that evening. They awoke in the apartment many hours later, with only vague memories of what happened the previous evening. It would take many years before the witness would begin to remember. Reynoldsburg, Ohio, a man, his girlfriend, and his cousin decided to get some beer and hang out at a local cemetery. The Glen Rest Cemetery in Reynoldsburg was partially owned by his girlfriend's parents, and so the witness recalled that they often snuck back there at night to drink. It was just something they did to pass time. Though all that changed on the night of June 26, 1996, when they were witness to something terrifying. This case can be found in the files of the Mutual UFO Network. We were hanging out on the bridge at the pond in the middle of the cemetery. The bridge is made of stone, and my girlfriend was laying on the stone ledge. The ledge is big enough to lay on comfortably without falling. We were all looking up at the sky talking, when we saw an orb fly across the sky. The witness described the orb as mostly red and orange in color, but with traces of yellow, blue,
You make no
and
sense to
green
me.
colors as well.
You make no sense.
The object was silent and seemed to be descending towards the ground, coming to rest behind some trees about 500 yards away. My cousin and I became very excited and jumped up and started walking in the direction we thought it might have landed. I told my cousin to wait, and I turned around to get my girlfriend to come with us. I grabbed her by the hand and helped her up. I turned towards my cousin to lead her in his direction, when she started saying, "Oh my God, oh my God." I turned to look at her,
Oh my
and it was like
God.
her whole body gave out, and she fell to the ground and pointed in the opposite direction of where we thought the orb landed. I looked where she was pointing and saw a man walk out of the darkness. He looked like a human, but I couldn't see any details of his face. He was dressed in black dress pants and a long-sleeved white shirt. Then two men dressed the same stepped out of the darkness behind him. They were coming out of the darkness in a V, like geese would fly. Then two more men behind them. The girlfriend began screaming for them to run. They alerted the cousin, who ran back to them. It was then he also became aware of the fact that they were not alone in the cemetery. The girlfriend and the witness began running towards the girlfriend's house, which was located near the front of the cemetery. The witness looked back to see that his cousin was not following them. He had not moved from where he was standing. I remember thinking, what is he doing? What is going to happen to him, the man recalled. About a third of the way running to her house, her foot sunk in the mud and she fell. I turned and picked her up and kept running with her in my arms. I remember thinking, how am I running holding her for so long? But at the same time, I don't remember running at all. Then we were in our driveway. My cousin was there. We all jumped into his truck and drove off. The next thing I remember, it was daylight. July 1976. A man and a woman were driving between Lincoln and Auburn, California, on a quiet country road sometime after midnight. The road was hilly, and the female who was driving the car remembered that they had just crested a hill and were making their way down when she spotted a bright, bluish white light shining down on the road about 200 yards in front of them. It was coming from a point over a large group of scrub oak trees. The trees came to a point over the road, creating a canopy effect over the road. What was strange is there were no streetlights, and none of the light shining down on the road was being blocked out by the trees. As they approached the light, the witness's car began to lose power. Then the headlights went out. As we were approaching the light, I was flashing my bright lights on and off before the car shut down. As soon as the car rolled to a stop, I opened the door to step out. The light disappeared, while leaves were floating down below where the light had been falling onto the road in front of us. Sometime after the light went out, the witness got back into her car and tried it again. The car started up, and she eventually was able to drive her male companion to his home and drop him off. She didn't think much of it until about 4 days later. She took her two cats for a scheduled vet visit, which was about 3 miles out of town. She recalled that the vet, who was a family friend, arrived back from a call. When he was upset and excited, he tended to stutter, and she recognized right away that he was stuttering. He eventually told her what had happened and what he had seen. He had been called out to a ranch to look at a dead cow. He explained to me and my mom that the cow had been cut up in a very strange way, with a missing eyeball, udder, and entrails. Its hindquarters had been drilled or bored out. He also said there were no flies, no bugs, and no predator bite marks anywhere on the cow. He revealed the exact location where the cow was found, and it was then that it dawned on the witness that the cow was only 50 yards from the very spot where she and her friend had seen the lights over the trees. Talking to her male companion later, she was told another interesting detail she had not realized. Apparently, when she had dropped her friend off that night, he was lectured by his mother about staying out so late, as it was 4 a.m. when he got home. This was something neither he nor the witness could understand. Both were certain they had only been driving around out in the country for an hour and a half at most. After dropping him off that night, I was really tired, and I just went home to bed and didn't pay any attention to the time. He claims we lost 3 hours. To this day, I have no idea what we saw or what happened. He refuses to talk about it with me or anyone else. I have seen other lights and strange things over the years, but this situation has always made me scratch my head, and I wonder what really happened that night to us and that poor cow. Nothing was ever said to the police or to the news media regarding the mutilated cow or the lights we saw.
I can take whatever you can give. I know. That's what I tell people. I seem to be the only one that remembers. Hey, did you rack up a lot of kills on your tour? Eliminate some tangos? No, senor. I was lucky enough to be posted here on Solis. That's always been the quiet assignment. Till now, that is. Claro. Not very quiet these days. But it was then, especially where I work. Waste disposal? That's not a real division of the Black Hand, no. I was on communications. Ah, no tangos. No, no tangos, Tiago. Just a lot of relaying of reports from one coronel to another. Did you ever get to scream hostile contact? No. How about you're going to die today, hueputa? No, not that either. I am going to hang you by your entrails, huevon! Disgusting, no. I thought you missed the point of joining, Santiago. Actually, Tiago, I joined to get training from one of the most technically advanced military forces on the planet. But you didn't even leave the country. Let's leave the elimination of tangos aside for one moment. I know for a fact that the Black Hand also do some really good disaster relief work in other countries as well. We've seen the footage of them all over the world, from other parts of South America to Southeast Asia, Africa, helping citizens rebuild after countless disasters. So I have seen that footage. So you didn't do any of that kind of service either? No, I did not. And then you left the service after one tour and then ended up doing radio. Buen trabajo. It's easier work than most, Tiago.
What's crunching?
Crunchy suppresses my fears.
What's crunching? Simply unwrap crunch and eat crunch. 100% milk chocolate and crispy rice. Anyone can do it. Even anyone. Learn crunching today.
Feel the power.
It was brought to you by Hunt a Killer. If you're stuck at home and obsessed with true crime and murder mysteries, then Hunt a Killer is the product for you. Hunt a Killer is a subscription box that challenges your puzzle solving and investigative skills by throwing you into an ongoing criminal case. Look through documents, decipher clues, examine audio recordings, and eliminate suspects until you crack the case. Sometimes researching and watching videos about true crime gets me into a puzzle-solving mood. Well, that's what Hunt a Killer is for. It gives you the opportunity to partake in an ongoing investigation and challenge your detective skills. You can play alone as a solo detective, or with a group of friends for a fun game night. Each box starts at $25, but by using my discount code Jorge, you can get 20% off your first box. Plus, a portion of proceeds from every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation, an organization involved in real-life cold cases. Again, click the link in the description below and use the code Jorge to get started on solving your first mystery. Thanks again to Hunt a Killer for sponsoring this video.
The Black Hand are so scary. They're going to pick me up off the streets and lock me up for doing nothing. Actually, I've heard the stories. You know, Santiago, I've never had a problem with the Black Hand. And you know why that is? Because I am a law-abiding citizen of Solis. And as long as you are to me, nothing to...
In 2006, 27-year-old Brian Schaefer walked to a bar and was never seen again.
Careful balance that a nation must strike between the need
The case has since received widespread attention and a thorough investigation. But to date, no one knows what happened to Brian Schaefer. When classes ended on Friday, March 31st, 2006, it signaled the start of spring break for Brian Schaefer, a medical student at The Ohio State University. He started his big break from school by having dinner at the Outback Steakhouse with his father, Randy Schaefer. Randy later stated that he never understood why Brian would go out that evening. He seemed exhausted from studying so much. After dinner, Brian met with his friend, William Clint Florence, and they celebrated the start of spring break like any college student would. A fun night of drinking and de-stressing. The two walked to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, an indoors bar located in Columbus, Ohio. Brian invited his brother, Derek, and Derek's wife, Maureen, but they had gone to a show at the Funny Bone Comedy Club, which ran late. They left the show tired and decided to drive straight home, passing on Brian's invitation.
Sorry, you never see it again. You will never see it again. Think.
Enemy spies using explosives on our supply convoys, and we've got their delivery schedule. Take some
Shit, man. Alles daripada belum gerasa ni belum aku mau dah sudah nasri afloh nasri actually Nazis Ashley's. Oh, I get it. I'll mute my phone now. Ada mas later,
Anyone else on the show, Santiago? None taken. And this man is Diego Insanto. Eso, is that historically accurate?
What video of the
The point is that this man is, as well as being a skilled marksman, I can't believe you don't watch this show, Santiago. As I've said before, I'm more of a reader. You were saying that the show starts with the boot of an attractive gentleman. What happens after that? Just watch the show, okay? He meets some of the local people. That must be the Cacha tribe. See, the Cacha. And these are some pretty tough individuals. You can tell by just looking at them. But over the course of the first season, Diego uses his charisma and his intellect and his fighting skills to show the Cacha that the Espinosas are people that you want as your friends. See or no? So they become allies? Well, I don't want to spoil the show, but yes. And then he helps the Cacha by starting a civil war within the rival tribe, the Aipa, causing a faction of them to rebel against their evil king named Otorongo. And I've already said too much. There's still people who are catching up on the show, unlike you, Santiago, and I don't want to ruin it for them. Bien, I'm sure they all appreciate that. So is it safe to say you are one of the bigger fans of the show, Diego El Santo? I think I'm probably the biggest fan ever. Well, you're going to like the surprise we have for you today then. Because on the phone... You're kidding me. We have... I cannot believe it. The actor that plays Diego Espinosa de Málaga himself, Jacobo Rojas.
Buenas, Tiago and Santiago.
Is this really him? Is this really you, Jacobo?
Sí, it's me, Tiago.
It sounds like him. No one is tricking you, Tiago. It's him. Dios mío. I have so many things I want to tell you and ask you.
I heard some of them already.
You did? Well, good. I'm not ashamed of anything I said. Bien, question one. How did you go about approaching the role of such a great historical figure as Diego Espinosa?
Pues, I felt a real responsibility to be true to the role. This was a flesh and blood human being we are talking about. An ancestor to one of the most influential, powerful men of this century, Oscar Espinosa. It was very important that I get the performance just right.
I I think you're doing an amazing job. So, are you on the set right now?
We are.
And what's going to be happening on the next season of Diego el Santo? It seems like the Espinosas have pretty much eliminated all of their threats. The Cacha and the Aipa tribes have been united.
Hey, what happened to no spoilers?
And the bloodthirsty war chief named Otorogo has been killed.
The most dangerous work is still ahead, Thiago. The indigenous tribes may have been united, but they are still not part of the colonies yet. And there are dangerous factions within each tribe that do not appreciate the benevolence of Diego's rule.
Oh, it sounds like it's going to be very, very exciting. I cannot wait to see it. Do you mind if I ask a couple questions that aren't about the next season?
They're going down. Every last one of them.
For a change.
Do you do all of your own stunts? Because Diego Espinosa has some pretty intense action scenes where he's defending his people from an onslaught of angry tribesmen or putting down some insidious mutinies in his ranks.
I do perform most of my own stunts. I train very hard to try to make the action look as real as possible.
Oh, it looks real. Another question. Do you ever hang out with Oscar Espinosa? You know, for research purposes?
No. Oscar Espinosa is a very busy man, and the people we are portraying have been dead for hundreds of years, so...
If you do, could you ask him about Project Illapa? Because Santiago keeps bothering me about that thing.
No.
Did I leave it easy? Another question. You have had a lot of romantic scenes with various cast members over the years. Who was your favorite for those? Fernanda, Regina, Catalina, and did they lead to any real-life intimacy? Were you actually naked in those scenes?
They're actually telling me I have to go now. Gracias, Thiago. Gracias, Santiago. I hope you all enjoy the next season of Diego el Santo when it comes out next year. Adiós, parceros.
Cuídate, mi gran amigo.
Qué bien. Very professional, Thiago.
I got a little nervous.
That was one of your worst interviews yet. And that is quite an achievement.
Shut your mouth, Santiago. Nobody likes you. We'll be back with more Thiago and Santiago show.
I am the smartest man alive. Your entire knowledge base is internet memes. It's Thiago and Santiago.
Need to find some place to eat? Need to be able to bring the whole family? Need it to be kind of noisy? El Rancho Viejo has all of what you're looking for. We've got arepas and empanadas and more. We have the most delicious and authentic traditional Solino cuisine that you can find anywhere, and we serve it fast. It's like going to visit your abuela, except that you'll be in and out of the building in less than 5 minutes. You're down to El Rancho Viejo.
On the next Jóvenes y Bellos, a family affair.
Let us go to the amusement park, mi amor.
I wish I could, but I cannot ride the roller coaster. I'm pregnant.
But how can that be? I've been steady since the mining accident.
I know, mi amor. You are not the father.
But I am. Gustavo. All that and more next week on Jóvenes y Bellos. Thiago and Santiago.
It's ridiculous.
Please fire us. Thiago and Santiago. Now, with 250% even more.
Hola, ese
segment on the show.
Conmigo solo me escribe. I don't speak español.
I don't care what Rafael says behind your back.
Let's watch this video about vanishing moments before disappearance. Viewer discretion advised. It aims to bring imagery in a nightmare. Bitches. We caught a terrorist attack. Yay! Yay! Let's go COVID with the team. Yay! Let's destroy the epidemic.
Can you believe these Placa cobardes? Sabotaging our own territory, planting bombs under the ground.
Shake my head, man.
Are an army for sale. They believe in nothing but winning cheaply.
It was 10 a.m. on March 13, 2011, as a mother and son checked out of the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin. At the time, one watching this footage would likely think nothing of it. There's nothing that stands out. No indication that this would be the last time Timothy Pitson would ever be seen.
6-year-old Timothy Pitson of Illinois disappeared Friday. He was last seen leaving a Wisconsin Dells water park with his mother.
It's a devastating case with many layers of darkness, and it's one that I've already covered on the channel. But it was this moment the seemingly mundane clip of the two standing together at the hotel checkout and then calmly exiting the building that's left a haunting impression in my mind. Today we'll be focusing in on the videos and photographs captured before the unthinkable happens. These are the moments before a disappearance. Before we start, this video is sponsored by Audible, the leading provider for audiobooks and spoken entertainment.
Yeah, the video is sponsored by Audible.
Thousands of different audiobooks to choose.
Use code,
Classics, all the way
whatever
to
his name is, for Audible.
Currently, Audible is running a promotion that gives you the first month of the service totally free of charge, which gives you access to one free audiobook of your choosing.
That's
Just visit audibletrial.com/NickPod.
We love
Sign up
terrorism.
for your free trial. And by using that link, you are also greatly supporting me, which is very much appreciated, especially considering this video is definitely getting to my
Hey, where do you think you're going, man? You got to die with this.
It's been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Sometimes 1,000 words just aren't enough. For our first case, this is especially true. It was early December of 2019 when 56-year-old Adrian Menneval was preparing for a trip with his mother, 83-year-old Felicity Loveday. Summer had just begun in Melbourne, and so, like many choose to do in the warmer months, the two decided to spend some time on the water. Adrian had owned a small fishing boat and had planned to stay on it for 3 days with his mother. Adrian had cared for Felicity for the whole 7 years prior, and getting her out of the house was likely something that could benefit her. And so, the two boarded their boat in the town of Frankston and prepared to set sail on this new adventure. As Adrian prepped the boat, his sister, Christina, was there to see the two off. She did have some concerns about the trip.
My brain.
She worried for her mother, but her mother Adrian promised her that he would keep in touch and send updates as the trip went on. Christina snapped a picture of the two as they settled into
Blah, blah, blah. Why are we so obsessed with Lavender Town? Lavender Town is up my dick town.
When you have sensitive skin, your clothes can turn on you. Switch to Arm & Hammer Sensitive Skin Free and Clear Detergent. No dyes, no perfumes, just clean. Because every wash counts. Arm & Hammer, more power to you.
Adam. My Adam. Hello, my friend. I'm Adam. What happened to Infinity Bitches? What happened to Infinity Bitches?
October 2011, Leroy, New York. A high school girl named Katie wakes up from a nap one afternoon and notices that something is not quite right. Her chin is repeatedly jutting forward on its own. Her face begins to contract and contort against her will. Seemingly out of nowhere, she is twitching and making strange noises with no way to stop. The symptoms are on for a few days, but after a few clinic visits, the doctors diagnose Tourette's. And for a moment, it seemed that was that. 2 weeks pass. A friend of Katie's and a fellow cheerleader awakens from a nap with the same symptoms, except the tics are much more centered in her arms. 2 weeks pass. Another member of the squad, this time someone who had only recently moved into town, falls victim to the same spasms, the same vocal outbursts. And before long, this seemingly contagious bout of Tourette's spreads to a 6th, 7th, 8th, 12th, and 15th student. Within 2 months of the first case, 20 people with the same condition. And now, this is beyond just the cheerleading squad. It's affecting girls in different social circles all across the school, even a boy and one 36-year-old woman in town. The Tourette's is spreading at an alarming rate. However, Tourette's is not contagious. Fast forward a month,
Lavender
November
Town gave them
2011. You're at your buddy
dumbasses,
Ryan's house playing some Red Dead 1. Instead of yeet, you're both yelling Fusro Da every time you do literally anything.
They fucking threw the Lion King, the baby lion.
Fast forward a month, November 2011. You're at your buddy Ryan's house playing some Red Dead 1. Instead of yeet, you're both yelling Fusro Da every time you do literally anything. TikTok by Kesha background, and you just rented Captain America from a red box from the Blockbuster down the street closed a few months ago. And as you suggest to Ryan that he turn up Kesha because you simply can't get enough of the 7 pop rocks and Mountain Dew hits her voice, somewhere out in the world, an anonymous rumor on pastebin.com is festering. This rumor claims that in the spring of 1996, over 200 children in Japan were all compelled to commit gruesome suicides after hearing the unsettling chiptune melodies of the Lavender Town music from Pokemon Red and Blue. Allegedly, others suffered nosebleeds, severe headaches, or became irrationally angry.
I call baloney bullshit.
The story goes that high-frequency binaural tones within the song that are inaudible to adults were the cause of the children's bizarre behavior. As a lot of you probably know, this was the beginning of the infamous Lavender Town syndrome, a creepypasta or internet ghost story of completely fabricated events that never actually took place.
The Hashleen slasher.
However, this was more than just an unsettling story. For the better part of 2 years, the internet was obsessed with the likes of Lavender Town, Gary's Radicate, Missing No, Buried Alive, the Pokemon Shock Incident, and everything in between. What began as a small post on pastebin.com soon spread to 4chan, Reddit, and eventually found itself being covered on YouTube, with landmark videos from the Gamer from Mars, Jay Wiss, and Epic Nachos, just to name a few. And like anything interesting, the internet did a little improv strat called Yes and piled on quite a bit of variations to the story, and even went so far as to dig up evidence for the legitimacy of this syndrome to make it more convincing. I'm not here to add to that pile of theories. I'm here to take a look at the why. What was the cognition behind these events? Why was the internet so obsessed with such a twisted rumor? Why did so many people believe it? Why did it give me headaches to listen to the Lavender Town music after all these years? And why did I have a friend once tell me that re-listening to the song legitimately made him look out a third-floor balcony and suddenly realize that he could jump if he really wanted to? And what the hell was going on with those poor girls in New York? How did they tie into this? Were these folks suffering from some form of contagious twitches caused by environmental toxins in Leroy? Or were they all just faking this for the media attention and Twitter followers?
Media attention is more if you want to bitches
what's for dinner tonight.
It's not that simple.
What do you want? But that's probably a good place to start, because what was occurring in the town of Leroy is a very isolated yet extremely
bitches like to dig dicks, man.
Across the internet.
Dumbass
During the
whores.
whole Lavender Town
I hate you all.
frenzy.
I hate whores. I hate cheaters.
Flashback to 1960.
Cheater,
You Ryan aren't around yet, but your parents are saying in the news that 23 train cars were derailed and spilled over 2,000 pounds of cyanide crystals and around 30,000 gallons of the solvent trichloro-TCE just outside of Leroy, New York, contaminating 2 wells. This was cleaned up and in reality has caused very few long-term issues for the citizens of Leroy, other than a pretty beefy stench for a bit. But as the Tourette's incident began to pick up speed in 2011, the most accepted explanation by the families and by the town was the chemical spillage, that something in the ground has surfaced and was causing this illness. Which I think we can all understand. If you spill 30,000 gallons of something I can't pronounce in my backyard, I'm blaming you for everything that's wrong with my life. Dry skin after shower, government spillage. Dog threw up at 3 a.m., government spillage. Crippling self-esteem issues. So when people started catching Tourette's like anime characters catch pneumonia, dry skin after shower, government spillage. Dog threw up at 3 a.m., government spillage. Crippling self-esteem issues. So when people started catching Tourette's like anime characters catch pneumonia after more than 30 seconds running without an umbrella, it became apparent that this could be something in the water or the air. The only problem is, looking at this factually, there's no way 40 years after the spill that suddenly now this is affecting kids and specifically high school girls. And since Tourette's is truly not contagious, there was no good explanation for how this was happening.
Did you want to say bitch back, fucking fucktard bitch?
Had in mind when they made a very, let's say, controversial diagnosis: conversion disorder, which is essentially when someone is experiencing a stressor or a trigger that is manifesting or converting itself into physical symptoms. Blindness, paralysis, numbness, even tics that are occurring due to something that would ordinarily not cause those symptoms. A good way to think about it is stage fright. Shortness of breath, sweaty palms, heart racing. These are symptoms that are manifested due to stress, but not a disease, virus, or disorder. In the case of these high schoolers, it was about a stress combined with the idea that the toxins in the water could be causing this to happen to anyone, and the fact that it was happening to so many others that caused the symptoms to occur. This is a classic case of a mass psychogenic illness, where members of a group all begin to experience similar symptoms that originate unconsciously and have no real medically explainable origin. These girls weren't faking anything. Their minds were convinced that there truly was some foreign illness from toxins in the water, and so the stress took the form of the symptoms seen, which in turn convinced and stressed more folks, and well, you can see how that cycle works. But you should know that all these years later, they are all doing much better, and are almost totally free of the symptoms, save the original world legitimately has Tourette's. A kernel of truth and something else just believable enough to twist that truth can go quite a long way together. Tourette's truly isn't contagious. However, the symptoms behind it, much like the symptoms of Lavender Town Syndrome, can find other ways to travel from person to person in a group. And if you happen to be someone who is fascinated with this deliciously twisted creepypasta, it's entirely possible that you experienced something eerily similar to the girls of Leroy, but on a much less drastic scale. Real quick, I want to explain something about the Lavender Town music. I highly recommend headphones for this part, but be warned, this is going to hurt your ears. There won't be any sharp, loud, or sudden noises, but you will feel some discomfort. I want to tell you about a type of frequency called pseudotones, which was recently found to cause some pretty intense pain in the eardrum and nerves leading to your brain after only a few seconds of exposure. Though it's barely audible, it worsens over time, and you've been hearing it in your headphones for the past few seconds. It's probably causing a lot of pain, only getting worse as time ticks away, slowly pounding at your eardrums. Except it's not. You shouldn't be feeling any pain. There's no pseudotones. There's no such thing as pseudotones. And unless you recognize this example I pulled from this old CGP Grey video or knew where I was going with this, you probably did really feel a pain in your ears. This is due to something called the nocebo effect. Essentially, the belief that something is going to cause you to feel pain or the effects of a symptom is enough to actually make you experience it. Nocebo is the evil twin brother of the placebo effect, where sugar pills, for example, will make you feel better based on expectation alone, except in this case, when the doctor tells you this is going to hurt or cause these symptoms, the medication typically does. There's a host of studies I've listed below if you want more info, but placebo and nocebo both work because prescribing the medicine. If a doctor tells you something, you're usually going to believe them, unless you're one of those anti-vax people, in which case, please look up a little thing called confirmation bias and reconsider your beliefs. Now, I don't think I need to tell you, dear viewer, that the internet is not to be regarded at the same level of credibility as your doctors. But sometimes an idea can have just enough truth involved to cause the nocebo effect to take place. It is true, after all, that certain frequencies are only audible to younger ears. And although the rumor that Game Freak changed the frequencies of Lavender Town in subsequent releases after the original incident largely remains a rumor, it's not unrealistic to think that the media can unintentionally harm children. There was this part in the Dino Senshi Porygon episode of the original Pokemon series, which I've censored, because it legitimately sent over 600 people to the hospital for seizures due to the speed of the flashing colors. This seemingly innocent television show about friendship and teamwork harmed people. What's to say the game can't do exactly the same? What's to say the chemicals aren't to blame for what's happening to my classmates? What's to say it can't happen to me? Maybe, just maybe, there is something to be concerned about here. And this is exactly what a ton of people were experiencing when the Lavender Town creepypasta was in full swing. People were getting headaches, reporting strange thoughts, and legitimately getting spooked by this bizarre story that did have a hint of truth behind it. and the uncanny sounds of Lavender Town's theme only added fuel to the fire.
In the comments, I literally had 1,000 people say that it gave them headaches.
And look, even if you were a skeptic then and comment on this video that you never once believed or felt anything regarding Lavender Town Syndrome, I think you know deep down that at some point, for a moment, you second guessed your skepticism.
Watch this video if you live in
And if you insist on it, be sure to let me know in the comments, since you can claim your superior human medal. Some of us want to be fooled. And that's one reason we saw people fabricate audio files of Lavender Town's music to show ghosts and messages when ran through a spectrogram. And of course, actually being able to download those files and do it yourself only made it feel more real. But that's the one thing that made this story so compelling. It was Pokemon. We all grew up with it. We all recognized the song. We could go listen to the track on YouTube. We could download and try that spooky spectrogram. It was almost effortless to interact with, and most importantly, it was everywhere. Okay, I'm gonna need you to put your humble pants on for this one. Be honest here. Have you ever in your life believed that we humans only use 10% of our brains?
No.
Assuming you're a human, of course. Shout out to the meerkats that watch the show. But have you ever believed that? I know I have. Thank God the movie Lucy came out and made me go,
Wait a minute!
It's very false in case you didn't know, but if you have ever believed this, it's probably due to something called the illusory truth effect. Back in 1977, a study by Hashner, Goldstein, and Topino had subjects rate how confident they were that a list of statements were true, and then brought them back to do this over and over for the next few weeks. Confidence in the statements that were repeated from week to week increased over time, while confidence in non-repeated statements remained steady. In other words, the more the subjects heard something, the more they believed it to be true, regardless of its validity. And this is exactly what drove the toxin rumors and the Lavender Town Syndrome to feel so compelling. Rumors spread fast, especially when it's something that involves fear, and the more people talk about it, the more it shows up on your timeline. The more we humans will naturally feel that it's true. Meerkats, you guys are immune to this. Stay off Twitter. Humans, though, I can feel your skepticism here. You might think that this illusory effect doesn't exactly work if someone knows up front that something is true or false. After all, if 10 people come up and repeatedly tell you that Kesha is actually your mom, you're not going to suddenly believe that. Knowledge trumps the illusory truth, right? Surprise! In 2015, some researchers at Duke, Vandy, and NC put this to the test. They hit folks with 4 types of statements: things they knew to be true, things they didn't know to be true, things they knew to be false, and things they didn't know to be false. And in all 4 conditions, when the statements were repeated over time like the original study, they were typically rated as true much more often than if they were presented only once. Even if folks knew something to be false, many subjects still second-guess themselves after hearing that statement over and over. Even if you knew Lavender Town was just a creepypasta, the repeated exposure could still tempt you to think twice about what you think you know, which of course is the beauty of any good urban legend. That doubt causes you to keep digging for answers, and the curiosity becomes morbid. The illusory truth effect works because the sensation of recognizing something is often confused with the sensation of validity in that something. Tie that in with some good old informational influence, since every meerkat around is talking about it, and you might feel like you're missing out on something important or even dangerous if you don't tune in. Well, that was a really long-winded way to say that we were obsessed with all things Lavender Town because the human mind is highly suggestible and can generate anxiety, fascination, and even physical symptoms if you feed it something just convincing enough to create the illusion of authenticity. The internet 9 years ago was a different place than it is today, but the reverberations of the Lavender Town creepypasta will be felt in internet culture for years to come. Not only because it could be experienced firsthand through Nocivo, but because this story is an innocent memory of days playing Pokemon as a child and perverted it, mangled it into something disturbing, unsightly. The nostalgia is corrupted, changed forever. Everything I've mentioned today is simply tendencies. Not everyone felt the effects of the Lavender Town Syndrome. Not everyone fell for my Nocivo example, and not everyone is as susceptible to the illusory truth effect. But for some, this may explain a lot. I'm sure some of you can imagine and some of you don't have to imagine feeling like Lavender Town Syndrome had really affected you in some way and then suddenly feeling an obligation to tell or even warn a friend. And if you can imagine that, it's not hard to see how mass hysteria can begin with just one post, or even just one person. My friends, my amigos, my compatriots, my fellow weebs,
what the fuck just happened? What?
This channel has hit 100,000 subscribers, and that is all thanks to you. I usually say thank you at the end of these videos, but genuinely, words can't describe what this milestone means to me and what a journey it has been to get here. So, thank you. I hope you enjoyed our random dive into this day of creepypasta and saw it from a different perspective than you may have in the past. Lavender Town is a piece of internet history, and I knew I had to leave my mark on it even if I'm like 9 years too late to the party. What are some of your memories of the Lavender Town Syndrome? Let me know down below.
I remember killing myself.
Thanks to the lovely meerkats over on Patreon who make this channel possible. If you're interested in bonus content or appearing in the credits like you see here, go over to Patreon, and for $1 a month you'll get exactly that, as well as nice and serious
remember that, Damon? You don't remember
Until next time, guys, take care and have a damn good one.
Oh shit, man! Thank you, Parsley. Buggy.
Just like really hardcore.
Oh wow! Wow, Raggy, that's booty.
The study performed at the University of Barcelona in 2013, where subjects were put in VR headsets and equipped with devices on their wrists. In each of the different testing groups, their virtual arm would begin to turn either red, green, or blue. And as the color appeared and became more prevalent, the device on their arm would increase in temperature until the subjects felt pain. The researchers found that in most cases, those whose virtual arms turned red experienced pain first, despite the fact that their actual arm temperature was rising at the same rate as the green and blue groups. The color red itself lowered their pain threshold. It's no secret that we all associate colors with emotions, places, memories, sensations, and so on. Of course, in most cases, those connections are unique to each person based on their experiences. For me, gray may be a comforting shade, something that makes me think of rainy days and lazy afternoons. But for you, it could just be dull. It could mean dark storms or depression. There are as many subjective meanings for individual colors as there are people, but it's clear that in some cases, color associations and even physiological responses are deeply universal and human. From testing of skin conductance and heart rate to cognitive tasks, people are unquestionably affected by color in some ways. Color is emotion, and it's the dynamic use of color that takes Nomada Studios' Grease and elevates the story it tells to a truly remarkable level. It's been argued that each segment of Grease represents one of the 5 stages of the Kubler-Ross model, better known as the 5 stages of grief. And each stage is painted with an appropriate shade to try and illustrate that emotion. Today, on Psych of Play, we're going to unpack the psychology of the 5 stages of grief and how Grease uses color to communicate the delicate complexities of sorrow, loss, and coping. Here is your official warning for major spoilers. Everyone has unique inherent associations to certain colors. There's no arguing that. However, that's not to say that a game can't create new associations in players by training them. Like I mentioned in an older video, the Mirror Temple in Celeste positions these yellow candles next to everything that is dangerous to teach you to associate yellow with fear and anxiety, while leaving the blue candles in safer places. Games often use blue and orange contrast to show if something has been completed, and I don't think I need to tell you how much health you actually have left if I just say you're in the red. The opening scene here gets busy establishing those associations early on. Our protagonist Grease begins in a world rich with color, and as she sings, things are beautiful. The colors complement one another in an enchanting way, and it's lovely. For a moment. Until... world begins to crumble around her, and she falls into the clouds, the colors with her. We find Grease alone, on her knees, crumpled and defeated. The gorgeous palettes now associated with joy and music are gone. All we're left with is an empty white backdrop, now symbolic of devastation. And it's here she enters the first stage, denial. This stage is characterized by numbness, a refusal to accept reality. According to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, denial is nature's way of managing shock by only allowing in as much as we can handle, which is beautifully illustrated in the first few moments of the game. As you move to the right and try to advance, the camera zooms out. The world becomes just a little bigger. Birds begin to fly by, a landscape forms. At first, she can only walk, but now she can run. And although there are no bright colors yet, Grease is beginning to let the world in, little by little. After Grease finds the crumpled hand from before, reality sets back in, and the next stage is triggered. Anger. In this stage, the red is strongly contrasted against the off-white backdrop and largely dominates the screen, exposing the player to vivid crimson structures. And like we established earlier, red is typically associated with pain in most people, which may explain why game devs typically make low health bars red. The color choice here is fitting, since anger is almost always stirred up from some form of mental or physical anguish. Prolonged exposure to red also increases your heart rate, according to a 2015 study published in Color Research and Application. Anger makes your blood boil, and by using red visuals here, the player subtly begins to emulate that body chemistry. But even with some of the inherent physiological effects of red, Nomada Studios still helps build your association with red in the context of the game by pairing it with fitting mechanics. There's this stretch of the environment where a sandstorm will continually blow in and wash the screen in dark maroon and vermilion shades. It knocks Grease back unless she hides from it, almost symbolizing the idea that her anger is too strong to bear. The screen being bathed in red is reminiscent of a blinding rage. To combat this, you'll find a new ability that allows Grease to become heavier and weather the storm. This ability also allows Grease to smash the ground below her. At the bottom of this pit, you'll find that you sort of have to make Grease throw a little temper tantrum to escape and smash the floor over and over, which is fitting. Researchers and health professionals agree that it's healthy to let the anger out during grieving. However, you can see that every time she slams the floor, her reflection reacts in a sinister way, foreshadowing something greater. With this new smashing mechanic in mind, you'll use it to solve puzzles in the last stretch of the red section without thinking twice. But there is this quiet little moment later on when you have to smash this moving rock to advance, and out pops this little robot who was living in that rock. He scampers off, Grease walks after him, and he is afraid of her. Her anger is hurting others. This displaced aggression is a common part of the second stage, and realizing that you are lashing out is a huge step in moving on. Once Grease finds the crumbled statue again, green spills onto the canvas, the third stage, bargaining. Green is a lower wavelength than red, and is much easier on the eyes. It's...
Well, I'm not too high.
typically associated with life, nature, and growth. And I think it's chosen to represent bargaining here because bargaining feels like an actionable stage, which is reassuring. It's characterized by a need to strike a deal in order to undo the feelings of loss, a need to reach out to God or others for help. This is reflected by Grease's encounter with the little forest creature, who is initially timid around Grease. But when she accidentally knocks loose this apple from a tree, he suddenly has a snack, and a relationship is formed. From this point on, you'll help him find some more apples, solve some puzzles together, and guide him home to his family, who in return will provide a star that you need to move on. It's a touching moment. However, as you move on throughout the level, you'll notice that green is not always the dominant color here. Pinks and crimsons are still very potent. From an aesthetic standpoint, yes, the red and green shades complement each other nicely for some gorgeous visuals, but I'd contend that this is more than just an artistic choice. It's still connected to the 5 stages. Throughout the level, there are these green trees that swap on a timer. They change shape independent of your actions. However, there are also red trees that only change shapes when you jump. Grease controls them. To me, the green trees represent the actions of others, and the red trees represent your own actions. Consequently, this section is a display of Grease learning to manage her anger and understanding what she does and doesn't have control over. This is the first example of what I so dearly love about this game. It doesn't abandon the colors from previous sections when you move on to another stage of grief. Because when you truly move on to another stage in real life, you don't abandon the emotions from the previous stages. The colors and emotions are still around, lying quietly in the background. Toward the end of Grease's first experience with bargaining, she encounters what appears to be a manifestation of her dark side, which was unleashed in her temper tantrum during the anger stage. And I feel that it appears here specifically because the bargaining has not worked. She has failed to end her grieving. The color black is often used in cinema to communicate that this is the villain, and this is likely done because most people associate the color with evil, sinister intent, and peril. Perhaps because our ancestors felt the most fear of predators in the dark. It's clear that in this encounter, the reality has set back in, and Grease feels like she cannot escape her fear of that reality. As the confrontation escalates, the green becomes less prominent, and before long, red overcomes the screen. Her anger is overcoming her again as she tries to fight off these terrifying thoughts. And it's only by using the bells that she can push away this creature. Music numbs the pain and settles her down. After her run-in with her darker self, Grease finds the statue again. Lost about what to do next, she cries and draws forth a cascade of blue. Depression. The color blue carries a much shorter wavelength than red or even green, and therefore will come off as a huge relief to the eyes at this moment. Blue is sometimes associated with water, cleanse, cooler temperatures, and so on. It's often described as a relaxing hue, and in the same 2015 study from earlier, participants reported feelings of calmness and serenity when presented with blue as opposed to other colors. However, scores in cognitive tests such as reading did decline in prolonged exposure to blue light compared to warmer, more vivid colors. In fact, in 2005, city officials in Nara, Japan, set up blue streetlights in certain areas and found that the number of crimes and suicides decreased by around 9% in those neighborhoods. There are mixed results in psych research to explain this, but it's clear that blue light does influence our energy level and impulsivity to some degree. So, why would such a comforting color be used to illustrate depression? Well, depression often feels like giving up, like there is no hope, no energy, yet there is a small peace in finally not driving yourself mad to change things, at least initially. At first, it can feel free to run from reality, and this is portrayed in Grease's new ability to swim. This swimming animation is the fastest you've been able to move all game, and it gives you the power to explore the deep chasms of this cave effortlessly, which subsequently allows for the underwater caverns to be expansive. Much like depression, the deeper you travel into it, the harder it is to find an escape. Of course, color is still used dynamically in this stage of the game. Much like the red chapter earlier, shades of blue wash out the foreground because, like anger, depression is an overwhelming feeling, despite the other emotions that may be inhabiting the background. Nomada continues to reinforce the conditioning from earlier as well by placing red stems, red spills, and red leaves where you'll need to use Grease's smash ability. Red fish and green shrubbery are peppered into the caverns, but do not occupy a dominant role because, although present, these emotions are often washed out in depression. Guided by a red turtle, which perhaps represents Grease's anger towards her own sadness, she is able to go deeper into the caverns until she escapes and finds herself right back where she started, as often is the case when we move on from a depression. And after realizing that there is no more point in running, she begins to see shades of yellow. Acceptance. The creamy yellow moon behind her illuminates the sky and fills the screen. Finally ready to at least try to face reality, she attempts to sing once again. And although she is unable to, trying alone is a huge step towards true acceptance. But it's only a step, and true acceptance doesn't happen all at once. It comes in bits and pieces. Chased back into her depression, Grease runs from the creature until she finds herself enveloped in total darkness. Then, her path is lit by small yellow lights. The color yellow has a higher wavelength like red, a warmer color that has also been shown to increase heart rate and attentiveness. It's typically used to convey cheerful and joyous emotion, but also caution, which is fitting here, as it faintly guides Grease back into the light, back towards her way to acceptance. And I think this choice beautifully illustrates this stage because acceptance is a slow, deliberate process. It's a few drops of paint here and there, not a splash. Not yet. And there, not a splash. Not yet. This stretch of the cavern is scary, as often the idea of trying to return to normal after a loss can be. After all, reality hasn't changed. It's still unfriendly. Attacked by her dark thoughts again, Grease swims away in panic. She draws closer and closer to being consumed by her dread. You can feel all hope slipping away. And then... the red turtle from before, Grease's anger, returns to save her from the creature. She refuses to be controlled by her fear anymore, and in her rage, she pushes it down and swims to safety. It's a triumphant moment, and it once again illustrates that the 5 stages of grief don't necessarily go in order. There are detours and bumps in the road. Grease offers a realistic perspective on the 5th stage. Acceptance is not just a moment that will happen one day and magically make everything alright. It's a subtle, scary process that involves slowly finding your way back to normal. It'll involve navigating all of your emotions and remembering every lesson you've learned along your journey to find that peace again. And once Grease climbs her way out of the cavern and ascends into the city in the sky, this is exactly what she must do. Yellow butterflies, lanterns, and fireflies illuminate a path for Grease that is previously unseen. Again, the gold and daisy shades represent a path, a way back to normal. And although her anger is required and even prompted in some moments to progress, it is only welcome when the time is right. The ground smash will scare away the firefly that illuminates hidden structures, but when well timed, it is used to solve this puzzle. Later, you'll use the swimming ability in conjunction with the red butterflies from the bargaining chapter to reveal a new path. After freeing the spider and the two beetles, Grease is able to continue, again echoing what the forest creature has taught her about reaching out to others. And fittingly, each encounter is accented by green. Throughout this stage, you get these lovely stretches where Grease uses what she has gathered on her journey to explore the upside-down portion of the city confidently. For the first time, we are seeing all of the colors working together, complementing each other for Grease's well-being. When we experience a loss, it often feels like our world has turned upside down, and I think this level takes a literal interpretation of this by slowly granting Grease the capability and courage to navigate what may be her new reality. Her voice returns to her, she is able to interact with others, and eventually, her world turns back right side up. Everything has changed, but now she can cope with those changes and try to move on. As she falls, the full moon envelops the screen and acceptance has arrived. However, even when things seem to return to normal, dark thoughts will always linger. Only now, there is no more running. It's time to confront them. The name of our protagonist, Grease, is the Spanish word for gray, the halfway point between black and white. And this Spanish translation is no coincidence, as Novata Studios is based in Barcelona, Spain, with several of its members native Spanish speakers. When the creature returns, it consumes all of the colors Grease has gathered, which is also no coincidence. Black is in fact the result of combining all of the colors of paints, dyes, or pigments. This is known as subtractive mixing. Conversely, when the light of all the colors is added together, it creates white through additive mixing. In both cases, all of the colors are present, but canceling each other out. White is used early on to convey denial, so many feelings and so many colors that there are none visible. Black is later associated with chaos, emotions running rampant, and untamable. The girl in the story is gray because she houses both the calm and the storm. And when she finally accepts that there is no more running from her fear and decides...
That's
just chasing ghosts. He has some faces.
And decides to sing in spite of its presence, it's only then that the colors trapped inside can work together, complement one another, and return beauty to her world. The Kubler-Ross model is not without its criticisms amongst psychologists, namely because it implies that there is a correct way to deal with loss. 5 stages puts a nice bow on things, but how people grieve is rarely that simple. Although Grease arguably tells a story about these stages, it does a tremendous job of painting it in an authentically messy light. Stages don't always go in order, nor is transitioning between them easy or even a one-way road. It's a frightening journey that takes continued effort to finish. Whether or not you've ever personally endured loss or bereavement, Grease offers an experience that is unpatronizing and unapologetic. It paints a picture of grief that is relatable on a level not previously seen in a game, and does so with grace and respect to the subject. All thanks to its music, its design, and in no small part, to its colors. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching this video. I hope that you were entertained, that you learned something, and that if you are going through a tough time right now, that this helped you in some way. My videos are made possible thanks to every...
Hello?
72 milliseconds. That is the average time it took in 2019 for your voice to leave your lips, reach your phone's receiver, get transformed into an electrical signal, travel hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, and then finally burst through the speaker of the phone belonging to the person you are talking with. Though finally may not be the word to use here, considering all that space was covered in less than just 1/10 of a second. Space isn't as much of an obstacle for people as it used to be. The intimacy of writing someone you love a letter will never quite be experienced again because the necessity for doing so has long been removed. A text is quicker and will do just fine. A phone call, a Facebook tag, or a shared meme can go a long way in raising your support point with someone. Distance can't stop human interaction like it used to. Hell, even your basic needs like a burrito bowl with extra guac from Chipotle, an impulse spot rice cooker, and a physical copy of Final Fantasy VII even though you don't own a PlayStation can all be delivered right to your home with the hopscotch of the thumb. Thanks to Amazon and other services I'm not sponsored by, even food, medical supplies, and pretty much anything you could ever need can all be dropped right at your doorstep. Long gone are the days when our ancestors would hunt and forage for food. Now it's the how much do I have to order to get free shipping metagame. You'll never have to search a library for information again, and there is no longer such a thing as not knowing where you're going. In a lot of ways, distance has been conquered. Earth has been captured and placed squarely in the palm of your hand. You don't travel to places, places travel to you. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, by the way. I'm not the biggest fan of getting out. I hate driving, and the rush of dopamine I get when random bullshit I've ordered online arrives on my doorstep is borderline inebriating. I don't like space, at least if it's between myself and what I want, and I think it's fair to say I'm not alone in that sentiment. Which may be why humanity has done such a good job of making the planet feel smaller, if you will. So, why then do we crave the sensation of being lost in an ancient alien world? Why do we pine for lush open vistas? Why do we demand more and more space to explore in open world games? Why is traveling via horseback through an unmarked portion of the map such a thrilling experience? Why do we turn off HUDs and feel the need to ignore objectives added to our map? Why do we purposely deprive ourselves of the conveniences the game tries to offer that we indulge in real life? Why did stumbling upon this abandoned tram car at the edge of Deep Nest and Hollow Knight make me feel desperately alone, yet somehow peace? Why do we have this desire to wander aimlessly in an artificial world? I'm Daryl, this is Cyber Play. Grab a blankie and your new rice cooker, get cozy, and let you and I talk about the haunting piece of being lost. Let's get the obvious out of the way. Running in a game is pushing your thumb up. Running in real life is pushing your heart rate up. Obviously, in-game travel is effortless. The lack of mosquitoes and traffic makes traversing the land of Tsushima much sexier than your trek to the grocery store. I'd be willing to bet that if gas was free, we were all in perfect shape, and safe states were readily available in the real world to make getting mauled by a bear a simple oopsie-poopsie, we would all explore Earth quite a bit more. But I'm here to talk about what makes exploration, and specifically losing your way in a game, such a captivating ride. And after spending a staggering amount of time pouring through studies about being lost and feeling alone, I've noted down to 3 primary reasons we crave the inconvenience of being isolated and adrift in fantastical, abandoned, post-apocalyptic, and eerily serene worlds. The first of which is related to neophilia, the infatuation with all things new. And I don't think I need to explain neophilia itself extensively. Most of us like new things in one form or another at all times. The brain is a wood chipper that'll explode if it runs out of wood, and brother, you'd better get to chopping trees. New trends, new music, new movies, new people, new games, new old games. You get the idea. But what most exceptionally built in-game worlds do is lock that new behind exploration. And the reason this works so well for players exploring Sutra or the Stone Tower Temple, for example, is because of the inverted U curiosity curve. According to a 2009 study, subjects expressed the most curiosity for answers to trivia questions for which they were sort of confident about their answers. If they were super confident or just had no clue whatsoever, they were pretty apathetic to find out the right answers. Kinney and Kagan found a similar effect in a 1976 study with infants and auditory expectations, which again seems to suggest that we have the greatest curiosity for information that is partially coded. We care the most if we've only had a taste of the answer. And this echoes the sentiment of economist George Lowenstein, who suggested that curiosity is a cognitive-induced deprivation that arises from the perception of a gap in knowledge and understanding. It's like a hunger. A morsel of information serves as a prime dose, which greatly increases interest. And this is the backbone behind the appeal of Metroidvanias. In Super Metroid, for example, you come across this narrow tunnel that you can't quite fit in. Then you find the morphing ball, so you come back to it, only to realize you still can't quite make it through. But you know from experience already that you can probably find a skill out there to grant you passage. So then using the morphing ball, you find this missile that unlocks this door, which leads you to this map, and then using that map, you come back to that dead end. And what's this? What's this dot? Oh man, I really gotta Atlantis my way through this tunnel now. Anytime a game can tease you with a little bit of information about a thing, your mind will naturally ache for the satisfaction of knowing more about that thing. Like, there's this dead end I found in the Queen's Garden in Hollow Knight, where I can see this little clearing in a house with a dude. I wanted to say friend, but I don't know if he is yet. I can't interact with him. Boy, I really want to. So after the dead end, I went and updated my map, and now I can sort of tell where he is, but I don't know how to get there, though I have an idea. And that setup right there is exactly what drives exploration. New knowledge is delicious, but incomplete knowledge is an itch that can only be scratched in games by unraveling a winding dungeon, traversing a dangerous nest, or surviving a scorching desert, just to name a few. By the way, I still haven't figured out what's going on with that damn clearing yet because I need some kind of skill to get there, and I haven't found it yet, and writing this script instead of searching for that skill definitely isn't making my face numb. But that's more of an extrinsic motivation. We're searching almost to relieve a need for quotient. Let's discuss something more intrinsic. That feeling you get when you look out over a beautiful body of water, when you stumble upon a lush clearing in the woods, or when you get caught in a spontaneous rainstorm. Let me tell you about biophilia. In the brain surgery recovery suite at Massachusetts General Hospital, each room has an internal and external facing wall. And for the first 24 hours out of surgery, patients' beds are facing the interior wall towards the nurses' station, so that the nurses can look patients in the eye and constantly keep watch in case of complications. However, after the 24 hours have elapsed, their beds are turned to face the exterior wall towards a glass pane, revealing a garden teeming with plants and foliage. This is not just to give the patients a nice view while they recover, it has in fact been reported to increase recovery speed and post-visit health. The atrium on the 8th floor of Massachusetts Gym is an investment, an installation based on research that has strongly suggested that simply a view of plants and nature goes a long way in improving cognitive performance and affect. In a 2003 study, researchers had subjects perform intentionally draining tasks and then sent half of the subjects to wait either in a room with a view of trees or with no view. As you might have guessed, the room with the trees was much better for subjects. That group had a faster decline in diastolic blood pressure, indicating that stress melted away much more efficiently. And if that's not enough to make you want to hitch your wagon to a spruce, the researchers also found that subsequently walking in a nature reserve as opposed to an urban setting boosted further performance on intentional tests, whereas performance by those in the urban walk only declined.
But wait! There's more!
Positive affect also increased for the nature reserve subjects by the end of the walk. Per the survey data, they were less irritated, less angry. Meanwhile, for the poor schmucks in the urban setting, the opposite pattern emerged. And it's because of this that architects are now designing office buildings and hospitals with biophilia in mind. That exposure to nature has a very real, measurable effect on our mental health and cognition. Now I hear what you're saying. Daryl, what difference does this make? Nature is great, but being inside playing games doesn't exactly mingle with that. Are you saying I should take my Switch on a hike with me to help my mental health? Are those Nintendo ads trying to tell me something? And the answer is yes, but also no, not really. Because through the miracle of graphics cards and flashy rectangles, our console of choice can deliver Mother Nature right to us. Your TV or your monitor can be the window. There's plenty of hot single trees in Breath of the Wild, so you can play all the fucking film there you would like without ever leaving your beanbag chair. And I'm not reaching here, by the way. I might be reaching a little bit. But there is strong evidence to support that even artificially created environments and even pictures can still have the same benefits as exposure to real nature. One study in 2015 used eye tracking and post-testing questionnaires to find what subjects spent more time looking at and found more pleasant: on-screen images of natural scenes or urban scenes. And even when the images had color removed or were distorted, the nature scenes created higher self-reported pleasantness and held eye fixation much longer. We are naturally drawn to the outdoors, to open sky, to environments that feel alive, to space. When you find yourself wandering through the land of Skyrim and come across the countryside of Lipton up near Maryfair Farm, you'll probably find that it is quite lovely, but also that it gives you cause to draw a deep breath and slow down for a minute. To me, Breath of the Wild works so well because you are constantly exploring the land of Hyrule, which is typically dangerous or requires strategizing to reach certain locations. But once you reach those higher peaks and earn that view, it's a relief. Not only because you escaped danger and reached your goal, but because you are surrounded by an abundance of life and ecosystems. Not to mention, high locations give you a clear view of what you'd like to investigate next, which starts that danger relief loop all over again. One common rationale for why biophilia has such a robust effect on us is this idea of prospect and refuge, coined by the English geographer J. Appleton. Prospect and refuge refers to the idea that when we are evaluating space, we would like the ability to prospect or examine the world around us, whilst also having refuge. This stems from evolutionary survival, where as a predator, you'd prefer to be able to see all around to spot potential prey without being seen yourself. Which is one reason modern architects are now designing buildings with more windows and higher ceilings, and why the tiny corridors in Deep Nest make you feel so uneasy. And why you breathe such a sigh of relief when you come across Ash Lake in Dark Souls, since the narrow tunnels full of enemies open up to a sprawling beach with distant vegetation. The clearly visible bonfire helps too, of course, but again, exploration in games is driven so much by this ebb and flow of dealing with stress and calculation to then discovering something that feels every bit as breathtaking as it does relieving. And for some of us, at least to a certain degree, that back and forth is tarnished when the game points to too many objectives and tries to guide us. This would explain why we like the inconvenience that is inherently part of searching dungeons or large landscapes. Half of the fun of exploring and creating that curiosity we talked about earlier comes from stumbling upon something that we can't fully interact with yet, and facing adversity to get there. And when we do finally find that place of refuge that also provides prospect and stir in a splash of nature, it's immensely rewarding and viscerally refreshing. Which may be why a high mountaintop, a bonfire, or even a bench gives off the same vibes as that nice waitress at Waffle House that you kind of want to be your grandma because she calls you baby or honey when you order your food.
Dang.
Like we established earlier, we adore all things new, all things novel, and preferably would like those things to require little effort. The voice of a loved one from any distance should only be 72 milliseconds away at all times. We relish the idea of effortless interaction with the world and its people. So why then do we work so hard to wander alone through often harsh, unforgiving, and challenging spaces? Yes, as we've discussed, there are things that are inherently rewarding about getting lost and finding your way again, but I think there is something else that is not often talked about. That tram I found at the edge of Beat Nest had no nature around it, though it was placed at the end of a brutal area filled with traps and constant enemies. So, of course, the bench I found was a relief. But for some reason, when I found this place, I didn't open the map. I didn't mess with my charms, I just sat and was alone with my thoughts for a moment. And something about the empty seats surrounding me, the flicker of lights on what seemed to be a once bustling tram system, and the song Reflection that typically plays near a bench being broadcast over the tram gramophone, made me feel more alone than I have in a very long time. It was almost like I was so deep and so far away from home that the game had to play me a distorted, warped version of the music I had grown accustomed to. The distance I had come in the game was so vast that a radio signal or a phone call was necessary to bridge the gap I had traveled. It could be argued that some of the appeal of horror movies is that it gives us a chance to prove how strong we are, that we can mentally take whatever disturbing imagery the movie has to offer.
I can't. I fucking get terrified any fucking way. Jesus. I'm the master fucking live stream. I'm the live stream master.
You could point to a similar appeal in sad music. It gives us a way to experience the feelings being conveyed by the artists without actually going through troubling times ourselves. And of course, you don't need a psych study to know that sad music is relatable. It gives us a bit of catharsis to hear what we have felt so deep down, but painfully intimate in lyrics. The desire to get lost in Zebes may be cut of the same cloth as the yearning to watch The Shining or to listen to that one anime soundtrack that makes you tear up on command. Loneliness is unpleasant, and despite my best efforts, the psychological benefits of loneliness turned up about as many useful results on Google Scholar as searching why does the guacamole go bad so damn fast. But despite how terrible the feeling of loneliness is, I would contend that there is an inherent desire we all have to feel alone. Of course, some of us are introverts and prefer to be alone in most cases, but I really feel alone, deserted, facing struggles and having no one to turn to. It's a feeling we have likely all had at some point in our lives, and getting lost in a game may give us a chance to safely experience that feeling without having to stay in it. Much like those lo-fi mixes on YouTube often capture the feeling of being up at 3 a.m. isolated with your thoughts, desolate settings and games illustrate that sensation of loneliness through the vast and unoccupied space. And that distance paradoxically brings you closer to others because it's relatable. Seeing loneliness portrayed like this, at least for me, gives me a time of peace. Much like a sad song comforts you with the knowledge that someone else has felt the same way you have, lo-fi mixes and lonely environments let you know that you're not alone. Someone else has felt this way before too. And look, maybe I'm getting a little artsy here. I know there are no psych studies in this part, believe me, I tried to find them, but that's my take, and maybe that makes for a cozy video. I'll close by saying that space is important. We may be connected to the rest of the world at shocking speeds, but I think it speaks to our nature as humans that we feel the need to supplement that distance with artificial miles and digital kilometers. It's an intimate feeling to wander lonely spaces where separation somehow brings us closer to ourselves, where discovery has to be earned, where you can't find answers instantly, where the view is more than metaphorically healing, where we can paradoxically be alone, together, where you can genuinely feel lost. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it feels so good to be back making videos for y'all after a small hiatus. It was fantastic. I finally finished Cowboy Bebop. I lost my JoJo virginity. I played Hollow Knight. I played a lot. Damn Hollow Knight. But I have missed you all, and I hope this video finds you well. And if it finds you unwell, well, hang in there. 2020 can't last forever. Thank you very, very much as always for watching, and I hope you enjoyed what you saw. Tiny announcement, I made a Twitter. It's fun. I'm still kind of getting used to it, but please feel free to give me a follow at NarrowTalksGames. A massive thank you to my Patreon backers who never fail to amaze me with their love and support. You guys make this possible. And hey, if you'd like to conquer distance and send $1 my way every month at Blinding Speeds, you get access to exclusive bonus content, early access to new videos, live commentary / Q&A on older videos, and your name in the credits like you see here. If that sounds like a good time, please be sure to click that orange link on screen. Well, my friends, thank you so much for being here. Take care of yourself. Seriously. Take care of yourself. And have a damn good
Zombie 19.
Just that.
Zombie 19 again. Yep. What is an internet checkpoint? A checkpoint where, hey man, you're getting the internet. What motherfuckers? No. I don't give a fuck about your hot dogs.
A few weeks ago, I found myself wandering the vast landscape of YouTube, just mindlessly clicking from video to video with no real goal in mind. And by random chance, I just happened to catch out of the corner of my eye a video that looked like this. A title that was clearly written in Japanese, a channel name I had never heard of, a thumbnail that felt deliberately undeliberate, and 3 little words below it. Recommended for you. It felt so out of place, so bizarre to be lined up with other videos on my suggested panel that I felt like I had to go click it and at least check to see what it was. After all, I knew a few of the characters since I'm learning Japanese, if you want to call 4 months of Duolingo learning, so why not open this mysterious internet door chosen specifically for me and see what's on the other side? So I did, and what I found was nothing like I imagined it would be.
Internet checkpoint?
The content of the video was nothing more than a strangely familiar soundtrack and a wallpaper composed of assets from a game I have never played directly, but have certainly been exposed to, Donkey Kong Country 2. The track in particular being Sticker Bush Symphony. An 8-year-old video with no description, no annotations, not even so much as a channel profile picture. At face value, everything about this video screamed unextraordinary. It's just one of the several extended versions of Sticker Bush Symphony on YouTube, except its title is in Japanese, making it a bit tough for most of us to find. However, something about the misplaced nostalgia of the soundtrack, the lack of meaning behind the video's origin, and the random nature of stumbling upon it by chance or by fate served as a breeding ground for a comment section that was unlike anything I'd ever seen on YouTube before. There were people spontaneously sharing their stories of their struggle with depression or finding a way to stay positive in the face of college courses and the pressure to succeed. Some were grieving breakups or recalling how they lost a parent to cancer, at a young age.
Well, I'm depressed now.
One person was explaining how he handled his best friend's suicide threat. Another was lamenting a lost job. Others were simply leaving positive messages for anyone who discovered this strange corner of YouTube, deeming whoever found it as main characters. And I suppose at some point the main character comments became pretty common, because a lot of the stories left behind begin with
main characters always
checkpoint, like a save spot in a game, but now for life, where people can record their progress up until this point and simply breathe knowing that they've made it this far. This is the story of how over 25,000 people, all converging on a dreamlike webpage that somehow found its way to each and every one of them, decided to share their story or leave behind something meaningful. This is the psychology of the internet checkpoint. The YouTube algorithm is designed to keep you on the site for as long as possible by recommending videos that it thinks you'll like, and judging by my uncanny ability to fall helplessly down YouTube rabbit holes, I'd say it's doing its job. We've all been there. Why am I watching a research? Did I really need to know that the elephant from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX has a bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impression?
Hasta la vista, baby!
I don't even wear makeup.
Fucking
Well,
terrorize
guess I'm
her?
going to learn Korean now. And without fail, the comment section is usually filled with clips like, let's be honest, none of us searched for this video, or other jokes about the random internet alleyway YouTube has just let us fall down. It's probably true that random videos like this get pushed because they are very quote-unquote clickable, and if we're being genuine, a lot of us have nothing better to do than to burn another 3 minutes learning how to make a tornado omelet. But as it turns out, something being specifically recommended to us does greatly increase our likelihood to interact with it.
Now you have my attention.
According to a study at UT Austin, subjects typically showed more enjoyment for and more intention to interact with media if it was presented as customized or handpicked for them than if it was just presented as standard media, despite being the same content for both testing groups. We like when things are handpicked for us, even if they really aren't. Simply the perception that it's for us gives us the illusion of control and narrows down the absolute interstellar tidal wave of media out there for us to consume. Stumbling across the internet checkpoint hypothetically could be entirely random, but the fact that it at least appears as something specifically for you only makes you more likely to click on it, and will only feed into that this idea that you found it because you are the main character in your story. And remember, it's not just clickability. The study suggests that people are more likely to interact with the media if it's customized, which may be part of why there are so many comments that open up with, I don't normally comment, but. Another reason that people may be more willing to open up is due to something called social conformity, which is a funny little phenomenon that can make people look really silly, but in this context may actually be doing a lot of good. You've probably seen studies on this if you've ever taken an intro psych class. There was the original Solomon Asch experiment where the subject was put in a group of people and given a really simple problem with an obvious answer. But as the other folks in the group, who were all secretly in on the study, continued to give the wrong answer, more often than not, the subject would just pick the same answers the others did, even though they were obviously all very wrong. Brain Games did a similar one where a guy gave a speech that was quite frankly gibberish.
Reefer madness, geometry, wisdom, tangerines, it all becomes possible.
And yet, the audience still gave him a standing ovation at the end, all because these two people who were in on the study both stood up and clapped. Or one of my favorites is the poor girl who would awkwardly stand at the beat in the waiting room simply because everyone else was, and she even did so once she was all alone in the room. Essentially, social conformity refers to the idea that we will either be paid by others in a group to be accepted and liked, which we call normative conformity, to be normal, or we be paid like others because of the need to be right, formative conformity. They must know something that we don't. Sharing your story, along with the idea that this is the edge of the internet, and that anyone who is here must be a main character, jokingly or not, is probably a form of normative conformity. Which I think is why so many people have felt comfortable sharing their story.
I guess I'm not the main character in my story.
Strangers. Now, of course, the difference here is that no one can see you. You
listen to music, and if they say anything about TJ being Jesus, you owe me $5.
You can simply write this off as just another video and move on. After all, when you consider that the video has 3 million views, suddenly 25,000 comments isn't a lot, so clearly not everyone feels the need to fit in there. But because so many have conformed to the norm of leaving their story, you aren't really weird for doing the same. All the entries have created a safe environment where the niceties, hi, how are you, doing good, and fake smiles of the typical social interaction isn't normal. In this oddly peaceful space, it may feel okay to open up and talk about what's really on your mind, to tell your story, or to leave encouragement for other main characters, like yourself. And by doing so, you only contribute to the norm more, paving the way for others to do the same. Stories are important, and not just for entertainment purposes or even for finding something to relate to. Stories are reconstructions of our past, the way that we make sense of ourselves and everything that's happened to us up until this point. And how we build those narratives matters more than I think we really know. There was a study by Holmes and McGregor where they provided subjects with an ambiguous story about a breakup, where it was unclear who was truly at fault. Then they had the subjects write their own slanted version of the story that places the blame on one party entirely. And in most cases, the subject began to believe their own story of how the fictional breakup happened. Even after 2 weeks, when they went back and only read the ambiguous script, they still felt that the person they originally indicted was still guilty. Even after 40 weeks, when most had forgotten the original story entirely, they still remembered which party to blame. As the researchers who performed the study put it, stories shape memories so dramatically. Once you tell one, it's hard to get out of that story's framework, and they tend to get more dramatic over time.
Am I right or am I right?
Bullshit. Which I think we can all attest to. You had to deal with your uncle's retelling of his high school glory days that gets more and more ridiculous every Thanksgiving.
There's no way I can my God, shut up. You will not have one mistake. You were third string, for God's sake.
But if we go the other direction, you can also imagine a friend who still hasn't gotten over that breakup that crashed his self-esteem. He can't seem to move on from that person and still blames them for everything that's wrong with his life. I think at some point or another, we've all been guilty of picking a narrative for ourselves and slowly settling over time, keeping that narrative true, or better, or for worse. Now, does this mean that every person who leaves a depressed comment about their life is damned to a life of misery and never finding love again? Oh my God. No, certainly not. So, while it's true that some people can get bogged down in the story they've written for themselves, exploring the tough times in your story isn't always a bad thing. Laura King, a psychology professor at Mizzou, has done quite a bit of research with folks who have endured major life events like divorce, coming out as gay.
Guys, I'm TJ. Say naturally, Adam.
Raising a child with a disability. And she has found that people whose stories ignore conflict do tend to become happier over the course of 2 years, but don't particularly make any gains in ego development, which refers to the complexity and composure with which a person views the world. In a study she published in the Journal of Research and Personality, she had parents recall the story of receiving the news that their child had Down syndrome. And immediately after writing the stories, and 2 years later, the parents completed measures of subjective well-being and ego development. The two big findings from this were that, one, the parents who wrote happy endings to their stories tended to actually be happier 2 years later, and two, only the parents who vividly described their mixed feelings about their child's diagnosis grew in ego development through the study. Actually facing their conflict and fear of the situation helped them grow wiser. Framing stories in a positive yet realistic light seems to help
Jesus Christ!
and in optimism. And this is a phenomenon that Dr. Jonathan Adler has found again and again in his research. Dr. Adler is a professor at Olin College in Massachusetts who specializes in storytelling in a clinical therapy setting and was kind enough to answer some questions and even provide me with some of his research arguments. In his 2012 paper, he had 7 adults write rich personal narratives just before beginning psychotherapy and after every session for 12 sessions. At these points, they would also complete a measure of mental health. Adler and his team found that the biggest predictor of improvement was when the patient's stories began to contain themes of agency, portraying oneself in control of one's life, as opposed to being bullied by the whims of fate. People tended to feel better after they saw themselves, rather than the therapist or anyone from their past, as the central actor in their stories.
Yes.
And if that sounds familiar, it's because I'm about to bring this.
I sound exactly like Cloud.
Hot damn, this was good fun to make. If we do in fact live out the stories we tell about ourselves, then seeing ourselves as the main character is exactly what we should be doing. Now, if you've studied psych for a long time like me, or just really the scientific method, you'll know that correlation does not equal causation. Just because the patient's stories are showing more signs of agency as their mental health progresses, doesn't mean their stories are helping. It could just be that the therapy is causing their stories to improve. However, Adler and his team used the lagged growth curve models on the datasets to reveal that the agency scores were typically predictive of future mental health developments, which is a fancy way of saying that the improvements in the stories came before the improvements in mental health.
This is never going to change.
And although this doesn't prove causation,
it never changes,
it
does
does strongly suggest it. Like Dr. Adler told me, it was as if people were telling a revised story about their lives and then living their way into that story. Like most things on the internet, the whole main character thing on this video likely began as a joke, or a clever little way to add meaning to this abandoned playground of a webpage. But over time, a joke can become a trend can become a norm, and a norm can create a safe place to do something a little out of character. The idea that, over time, people begin to leave their stories behind and potentially even frame themselves as the main character of their stories thanks to a few upstanding connoisseurs of internet culture can't help but make you grin. And the idea that anyone framing their story in this manner may actually be making even the smallest improvement to their perspective on life makes this one of the most beautifully serendipitous anomalies to ever materialize on the web. To wrap up, I'd like to say that I know for some of you this is just another video, and I should stick to analyzing games, not random videos that just happen to have the soundtrack of the game. And if you feel that way, I get it. I can't be mad at you. Honestly, this is barely a psych of play. It's really more of a psych of comment sections. But I hope you still got something out of it, because I know I certainly did. After randomly coming across this video, I knew there was a story to be told. For most folks, it's probably just another video, and that's fine. But for others, it truly is a safe place, a discovery found at 3 a.m. when sleep evades you, but hopelessness is at every turn. A corner of YouTube to listen to a strangely nostalgic melody and remember days past and hope for days to come. A wall to graffiti with encouragement for others, even if the one who needs to read your words the most is you. A room to read some stories left behind, feel a little less alone, breathe, and perhaps even leave a checkpoint of your own on your journey here at the edge of the internet.
At the edge of nothingness. At the edge of tomorrow.
Well, my friends, I hope you've enjoyed this dive into this strange YouTube rabbit hole. I want to send a huge thanks to Dr. Jonathan Adler for taking time away from his pioneering research to answer questions for my video about YouTube comments. Did I really spend a whole month on this? Dr. Adler has done some amazing work in the way of using stories as a means to aid in the process of navigating illness and empowering individuals and families facing health challenges. If you're interested to see what he and his team are working on, definitely check out his website, link in the description. I'd also like to say a massive thanks to all of my friends on Patreon who continually back this channel with all of the determination of a group of competing soccer moms at a booster club meeting. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, for just $1 a month, you'll get your name in the credits like you see here, behind-the-scenes access to what I'm working on next, and Patreon-exclusive live streams where I go back and rewatch my old videos, talk about what didn't make it in, answer questions, and just kinda have a good time. So if that sounds like fun, gently click that mysterious orange link on the screen. I'll see you next time, take care of yourself, and as always, have a damn good one.
Nostalgia is encoded into music. You got me. I had a time travel. Fucking can. A new time travel to past.
It's time.
It's time to time travel to past. Yes. Yes, fuck it. You can time travel to the past.
Ben?
Fuck it. I got you. Don't worry. Don't worry about that. I got you. Don't worry about that. Wow. Oh shit. He's getting fucking shot at. What the hell, man? They're getting shot. She getting shot. Man, she dead. You don't need me. Warcraft. Only legend could play.
This is Henry. Henry is a resident at Cobbleville Nursing Home who suffers from symptoms of dementia. He's been in the home for over 10 years now and is almost totally non-verbal. Doesn't speak much and severely struggles to recall the names of his own family, which is a typical symptom of dementia and Alzheimer's. You may recognize him if you saw this viral video a few years back or the documentary Alive Inside, a story of music and memory. In this film, they took the time to perform musical therapy on nursing home patients like Henry by simply allowing them to listen to music from their youth in hopes that it would aid in memory retrieval and spark some nostalgia. For Henry, the treatment looked like this.
I want to sing with this.
You can if you like.
Shortly after this little jam sesh, he was answering questions about the music he grew up with, songs he liked, and how they made him feel. In this short 5-minute interview, he probably spoke more words than he had in the past 5 days leading up to that moment. And this was the common response in all of the elderly featured in the film that suffered from Alzheimer's or any form of memory loss. Husbands and wives reunited, stories from the past resurfaced, and life brought back to the faces of the seniors that listened. Music has a very powerful, almost magical ability to bring us back to a place or a feeling from the past, even in those that have severe memory disabilities. It's no wonder that something as simple as the theme from Halo, the sounds of the Great Sea, or the prelude to Final Fantasy can bring you right back to those nights when you stayed up until sunrise at a LAN party, or cartwheeled into your room with a copy of Wind Waker because they finally had one in stock to rent at Blockbuster. And that beautiful feeling of being transported back thanks to music is what I'd like to dissect today through the lens of memory encoding and retrieval. I'm Daryl, this is Psych of Play, and in a world where pretty much every game analysis channel has made something on video game music, join me as we add another one to the pile. Except in this vid, we're going to look at it from the perspective of cognitive psychology, encoding, retrieval, and Alzheimer's. And if anyone's already done that, well, I've already made the thumbnail, so... I think we all understand the idea of games training us to associate a certain song with a particular moment or emotion. All you need to do is play this track every time a Guardian notices Link in Breath of the Wild, and you can condition the music itself to signal danger. You can surprise the player with this track when they happen to run into one of those sweet legendary doggos in Pokemon Crystal. When this music hits, you feel some relief and know you've done something right. You hear this music, you simply panic and start scoping out potential windows to throw your controller through. These types of associations happen because our hippocampus, the main memory processing center of the brain, begins to notice that the music and the events in the game are repeatedly happening at the same time and are likely connected. Therefore, remembering the sounds with the event is advantageous, so they are encoded together. It's the same thing with all senses. Our ancestors got sick when they ate food with a certain smell, and today our brains recognize that smell as rotten. We also associate certain colors and shapes with caution, because that's what we've been taught. Typically, our hippocampus notices these patterns because of repetition. Every single time you are in a particular scenario, the music plays. But what about those soundtracks in a game that maybe only play once or twice for a limited period of time, but still stick with you? There's no real importance in the context of the game's mechanics in the song Undertale from Undertale, yet it's continually regarded as one of the game's most memorable soundtracks. Of course, you'd remember this soundtrack from The Witcher because you hear it every time Geralt finds himself in danger. But what about songs like Confronting Myself from Celeste, which only plays during the showdown with Badeline? Why would the hippocampus choose to store these tracks to long-term memory even though they aren't repeatedly paired to critical gameplay information? Well, the hippocampus isn't alone in deciding what information gets encoded. To long-term memory. Its trashy next-door neighbor, the amygdala, also has quite a bit to say when it comes to what's important. The amygdala is the emotional processing center of the brain, and several studies have found that music can influence the amygdala in some pretty profound ways, which in turn influences how the hippocampus encodes information to long-term memory. A study published in Nature in 2014 found that music that creates pleasurable emotions lights up the amygdala and the mesolimbic pathway, one of the 4 dopamine pathways that generates the feelings of happiness in the brain. And this may come as a shock to you, but as it turns out, our brains like to be happy. They enjoy that rush of dopamine that comes from music, those little delinquents. And just like your brain prioritizes not dying in Zelda because it keeps you happy, it prioritizes the feel of emotional music and the moments connected to them because that also makes you happy. When music strikes us as moving, our amygdala jumps in and says, hey, hippocampus, 2 things. 1, shorten your name. It's obnoxiously long and it vexes me. And 2, always remember how dearly beloved goes. It makes me feel things. And I like that. But the amygdala isn't alone when it comes to emotional music. Sometimes there truly is a pattern that the hippocampus picks up. Because in a lot of cases, that music we think we've only heard one time, we've actually heard before in a different form. This is called leitmotif, and happens when a subtle theme in music is associated with a particular person, idea, or situation, not necessarily a game's mechanic. My boy Matthew Dyson has a great series on this and Final Fantasy on his channel GameScore Fanfare that you should definitely check out. Anyways, the song Undertale is just a mashup of the theme from the intro sequence and his theme. Which is only teased in the game once or twice. Together, these themes combine to create that strange familiarity and make you feel that your journey is coming full circle. Final Fantasy X does something really similar with its intro sequence that my man Tom O'Regan pointed out in his video on intro cutscenes. Leitmotif, especially with tunes that are super emotional, is simply a more subtle version of the game mechanic musical association I mentioned earlier, and works due to something called context-specific learning. Our minds are more likely to recall the visuals and ideas that were present at the time of encoding if the current music or environment matches what was present at the time of encoding. In other words, a song will remind you of whatever you experienced when you first heard it or first got familiar with it. This use of leitmotif and association is also applicable in movies, and Disney uses it a ton to make you feel like you're gonna cry and not fully know why. Like at the end of Up, when they sneak in a gentle piano version of the music from the opening scene with Carl and Ellie. Sideways has a great video on how Pixar does exactly this, and boy, a lot of shoutouts today. I guess I just gotta send some love to the creators that inspire me, and like I said, this is a really popular topic. But what's fascinating to me is just how far-reaching some of these associations can go. Like, think about how that live-action Mulan trailer really wasn't doing it for you until the music swelled, and you realized it was an instrumental of the song Reflection. And suddenly, you were a 10-year-old girl in your PJs again, singing along with Mulan on the VHS. You might have had one of those cool TVs with the VCR built in at the bottom if your family was bougie, but either way, you definitely didn't rewind the tape before you put it back in the box. In reality, Dr. Wily's theme is just a melody. To most people, it's just another good song. But to you, it could be a part of who you are. It could sound like your childhood. And this is the really long-term association stuff. Nostalgia that sticks with you for years, and sometimes even a lifetime. It's important to note that the music being played for the seniors in the Alive Inside documentary was from very early in their youths, typically from when they were below the age of 30. This matters because research has shown that between the ages of 10 and 30, your identity is under construction. There is a phenomenon in autobiographical memory research known as the reminiscence bump, where across several cultures, middle-aged and elderly people will typically access more personal memories from around the age of 10 to 30 years old. This period of adolescence to early adulthood appears to be where most of these strongly personal autobiographical memories are encoded, which is why the music we consume during this time is more than just music. It's more than just emotion. It's who we are. Music we listen to during this time becomes entwined with our lives. The soundtrack for Route 30 may have become the soundtrack of your elementary school days. Jeremy Soule may have scored Skyrim and your time in high school or college. Cab Calloway may have composed music for the Cotton Club in Harlem and for Henry's favorite chapters of life. But it doesn't stop at the reminiscence bump. I touched on this very briefly in the How to Study video from last November, But there is also a finding known as the self-referencing effect. Essentially, when any information is related to you in some way, you are far more likely to recall it at a later time. And when you pair this with the context-specific learning I mentioned earlier and the reminiscence bump, it's no wonder music is so effective in stirring up these autobiographical memories. It's one prompt that can consistently aid in retrieving information from long-term memory that is decades old. Which brings me to what I think is the most promising finding from this documentary and from other research I've found. For those with forms of memory loss, there has been a long-standing belief that those affected either can't encode and form new memories, or that old memories are damaged and inaccessible. Alzheimer's typically results in the degradation of dendritic spines in the brain, but it's never been exactly clear how this affected cognition until a 2016 study at MIT. Using amnesic lab rats that have similar dendritic spine damage to Alzheimer's in humans, Susumu Tonegawa and his team conditioned a fear response in a group of rats with amnesia and a group without it. The conditioned fear stimulus probably wasn't the drowning music from Sonic, but I like to imagine that it was. Naturally, for those with the Alzheimer's, it didn't take. However, afterwards, when they used optogenetics to beef up the number of synapses, the amnesic mice remembered just as well as the controls did. What this means is that the rats with Alzheimer's did, in fact, encode new memories. The association was getting in, but just couldn't be remembered. This has been replicated in other studies with longer-term memories as well, suggesting that Alzheimer's is a retrieval problem, not an encoding problem. And I think the Alive Inside documentary echoes this finding beautifully. The memories are there, lying dormant. And due to music's inherent association with the memories of someone's youth, the people from that time, and the emotions linked with them, it's hard to find a better supplement than a nostalgic melody. When you look at this mountain of research, you can see why. The self-referencing effect, context-specific learning, the reminiscence bump, all separate findings that supports music's ability to revive the past and aid in the retrieval of autobiographical memories. And that is truly a wonderful thing.
Mitch!
Hey there, thank you so very much for sticking around until the end of this episode. I know this one wasn't as centered on gaming as the usual show, but I really did have fun just talking about some good old psych research. So I truly appreciate you letting me try something a little different, and I hope you enjoyed it. Next month we'll be doing a deep dive on a game I've never talked about on this channel before, so be ready for that. Oh, and BT does, due to popular demand, I have a Patreon now, and I'm producing some saucy monthly bonus content over there, so be sure to check out the link if you want in on that. Make sure to like the video, let me know what your most nostalgic video game soundtrack is in the comments, consider becoming my patron, take care of yourself, and have a damn good one.
Applebee's 2 for $20. Now that's eating good in the neighborhood.
If you had to guess, how deep underwater do you think the Titanic's wreckage is? No cheat. Okay, picture this. It's Thursday night and you and your boys are playing some Mario Kart. Bernard's been talking trash all night, but he can't back it up because you're comfortably sitting in first and he's bringing up the rear. And then he hits you with this. He starts laughing, you crash into a thing, a dinosaur wearing Uggs passes you, and then all of a sudden, you just might be the most irate schmuck in the Western Hemisphere. I'll do you one better. The next weekend, Bernard starts talking hot garbage again, so you decide, let's settle this like men and duke it out in some Smash. You start playing, and about halfway through the round, right as you're starting to feel good, Palkia shows up and flips your controls. Suddenly right is left, left is right, and if right is wrong, then I don't want to be right. You accidentally run off the edge, and Bernard gets the dub. Palkia, you son of a bitch. It's such a strange feeling when a game starts lying to you, when it takes your controls or your display, and then tweaks it just a little bit to be inaccurate, which makes your life more difficult, but to be clear is sometimes pretty hilarious.
Oh my god!
Controls that are delayed or over-exaggerated, screens that warp, block information, or move on their own, or when your D-pad/joystick suddenly flips on you and forces you to move in the opposite direction you want to go, so that you can move in the direction you actually want to go. All of the above are examples of something called interface screws. Generally, these are done to make the player feel a certain way. Maybe the game wants you to feel dizzy or like you're hallucinating. Instead of every copy of Yoshi's Island coming with a free hallucinogen to complement this stage, Nintendo made the button inputs really delayed, warped the display, and messed with Yoshi's momentum a little bit to make him feel randomly heavier and off balance. Probably avoided a few lawsuits with that decision. In Earthbound, the rambling evil mushrooms cause confusion in each battle, but outside of battle, they'll turn your controls clockwise or counterclockwise to make you feel just as confused as your boy Ness. At the Golden Ridge and Celeste, the winds are ridiculously strong, so depending on which way they're blowing, you'll either have to hold left to keep from flying away like an old Walmart bag, or mash right so hard that your thumb turns purple from just trying to move a freaking foot towards the next screen. Now, players generally have mixed feelings on interface screws because, let's be honest, I'm supposed to calculate mid-fight exactly how to do a forward air when my controls are backwards? Oh, and I've got to recover first? Wait, I'm dead. Just kidding. Victory is for people with friends. To a lot of folks, interface screws feel unfair, and I think that's an understandable complaint.
Well, that's the end of this video. If you like the video, thank you. If not, I don't really care. Bored. Getting fucking tired. Trying to fucking take this chick to the fucking location. Keep on fucking